Today we're going to talk about a surrogacy journey. So we get a lot of people calling us and doing surrogacy searches every year. We do, close to 100. We have unique partnerships with smaller boutique agencies. So we say we work with around 55, sometimes it's 60, 55 different surrogacy agencies. And the reason we do this is because we have unique partnerships with those agencies, and they allow us to view their candidates ahead of time. So with me is Gloria Lee and Crystal Lemke, who are our case managers who work with surrogacy, among a couple of others too. So we wanted to go over the most common questions we receive about surrogacy and how we work. So I want to ask Crystal, you actually have had an agency before. What's the purpose of having an agency? We get a lot of people saying, well, what does an agency do? Why do I need to use an agency?
Sometimes that's a great question. And oftentimes we'll say, well, I have a family member or a friend who can be my surrogate, and they see the costs associated with an agency. So that's a common question that we see is, why is this necessary? Why do we need a surrogacy agency? I think to go back to the beginning is one of the largest roles that often is overlooked when parents start searching is the role they play in screening your surrogate. The surrogacy agencies recruit these surrogates. They spend a lot in advertising to recruit these and educate these surrogates and walk through the process. I would say for every 100 surrogates that apply, maybe 3 make it through. There's a lot that goes into that. I mean, the education piece, you'll see surrogates fall out. When you start going through their questionnaires, they fill out lengthy questionnaires to find out the health of their pregnancies, their overall health, their family's health, their living situations. Are the children living with them? How many pregnancies have they had? But to screen through, they usually have at least one full-time member to go through and review these surrogate candidates. They'll, after they obtain the medical records, that's a huge one as well. You can't work with a surrogate unless you have her prior medical records or OB clearance letter. So to request all those documents and have that reviewed, they take care of a lot of that on the front end. And that's really important. So then when you are reviewing candidates, that they've already been vetted by the agency. And oftentimes they've had some kind of preliminary medical review. We don't want to be working with surrogates who have had complications during their pregnancy or delivery, or maybe ones you oftentimes get surrogates apply who've never even been pregnant, and you need to have that history. The agencies really wear a lot of hats, and they cover a variety of issues so that you don't have to. In addition to finding your surrogate, they act as a liaison between you and your surrogate, as well as between your surrogate, the clinic, and the hospital. And that's to ensure that the hospital is aware that there will be a surrogate birth and that you are the intended parents. The agencies also coordinate getting medical records to your clinic so they can review. And that's kind of like a preliminary pre-approval. Just because your doctor has seen those, or reproductive endocrinologist has seen her medical records, doesn't necessarily mean that she'll be cleared to proceed. They kind of give a preliminary pre-approval, and then they start medical screening on her. And not just with that, they also get information to your attorney, help with attorney referrals. They handle all travel arrangements for your surrogate and notify the escrow company when checks need to be distributed. It's
so there's a lot that goes into it, not just before the match, but during the match and as the pregnancy proceeds as well.
And also help review the insurance, and which is very important for the journey.
Yeah. And even throughout the process, if there's any issues that arise, that surrogacy agency is your buffer. So you don't have to go back to the surrogate or her come back to you and ask for things that may be a little uncomfortable. We want to make sure that you have a liaison there that you can talk to or come with questions, and they have that knowledge and the expertise. That's really important.
We get the question a lot because there are new agencies springing up. If you go on the internet and you look for surrogate in California or surrogacy agency in the US, there's hundreds of them. And, we're very careful about who we work with. But there seems to be new agencies springing up every week, and there's no regulation. Anybody can start an agency. And we don't say that to scare people, but anyone can start an agency. Anyone can just set themselves up as a surrogacy agency. There's no regulation. So, Gloria, for you, sorry, I was going to ask Crystal this question. How does Donor Concierge vet the agencies we work with? what do you look for, sorry, Gloria, yeah. What do you look for when you're, because you deal with talking with a lot of new agencies, what do you look for when you're working with the new agency?
Well, we really want to review the agency, how they, as Crystal mentioned earlier, that they do all the background checks, they screen the surrogate, and how they screen the surrogates. And also, why they start the business. And we also want to find out, if they have done all the, like a background checks, financial.
Criminal background check, correct?
Yeah, criminal background checks, financial background checks, and if she has a family support system, and also even including a home visit. And some agency, we want to find out if they have even done psychological evaluation before they can approve the surrogate. Did they review did they get the medical records from the OB office? So those are very important information we want to get from the agency. And also on top of that, we want to ask for reference. If there's any formal clients they work with, or attorneys or doctors they used to work with, and who can give them a reference. And then that's something like we really want to pay attention to, and we want to go through the whole vetting system before we can feel comfortable to present the candidates from a new agency.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we also stress is just because an agency is new doesn't mean that they aren't a good agency. I think agencies from what I've seen, they are started by people with really good intentions, and they may be former IPs, they may be former surrogates, they may be former nurses, fertility nurses, lots of different people start agencies. But Crystal, what do you think makes a good agency?
I think there's several things that go into it. Not assuming, you want to make sure that they have the knowledge and the expertise to navigate an entire surrogacy journey. There's so many pieces that we've referenced, the legal, the insurance, so many different pieces. So they have to be knowledgeable and be experts really in their field. So aside from that, we want to make sure that what I like to see is flexibility and communication, good communication. Nobody's journey is the same. Everybody's different. And what I really like to see with the agencies is they're interested in learning the intended parent's story. They like to know kind of what they've been through, how we're going to get them to pregnancy, what that looks like. They might have certain wishes throughout the pregnancy. We want to make sure that that information is taken into consideration to find the best possible match. And communication. I think a lot of parents, they haven't gone through this before. They like to be updated. They like to have the information, what's going on, what does next steps look like? And the agencies that I think do really well are really great communicators, saying, here's a surrogate that we really like. Here's why we like her, and we think she's a good fit for you. And then being that liaison, not leaving that communication up to the intended parent and the surrogate. There's a lot of communication that goes on even behind the scenes. So the agency might say, well, I'm touching base with the surrogate 2 times a week and having all this communication, but the parents might not know that. There's so much more that goes into it. So even just giving updates on what's happening throughout the entire journey, I think makes a really successful agency, and ones where the parents really feel like they are their priority, that they know what's happening and know what to expect going forward.
And I would also add, when we're looking at new agencies, we're also looking at transparency. So who owns the agency? How long have they been in business? Is the owner listed on the website? Do they have the key people, the key directors of the agency and case managers listed? We want to know, the background. So those are some of the things that we also look for when we're looking at an agency.
And that's a big one too, the screening. Like how thoroughly do you screen these donor or surrogates? What information are you gathering from them, and what's already done before the match takes place? Really knowing that they've kind of done their homework and can present an accurate picture of the surrogate.
Yeah, and I mean, when we are looking at surrogates, we have our own internal criteria, which is that we follow not only ASRM guidelines and the clinic protocols, but we're also basically looking when an agency sends us profiles. Gloria, what are we looking for when we're looking for a surrogate profile and a candidate that's sent?
We first of all, we want to make sure that the surrogate age between 23 to 38, and also BMI no more than 30, and also some clinics they may require no more than 28. Then have had at least one birth, but no more than 5 live births in total, and also no more than 2 C-sections, uncomplicated pregnancy history, and also carry the babies to full term. And she has great family support system, and also financially they're stable. And we also want to make sure that the agency has done the home visit and get all those OB records reviewed, maybe by a partner clinic, and also they have insurance reviewed already. So those are probably the criteria we will make sure we will review before we even present someone to the clients.
One of the most common questions that everybody asks is, how much does it cost? So if somebody says to you in a consultation, okay, how much does a surrogacy journey cost? What would be your answer?
So this is a very interesting question, because yes, all the Indian parents they will ask. So this is really depending on which clinic you work with, how much they charge for transfers, and also this is a wide range based on many factors: agency fees, the legal cost, surrogate compensation. If surrogate is in California, maybe the surrogate will ask more compensation than non-California surrogate, and also insurance cost, and also if she needs to travel, the travel cost. So typically I would give the clients at least, I would say the budget wise, probably around like $100,000 to at least $180,000. And it's important that you aware that you have this budget, plan your budget before you even start the whole process.
Right. And with that, Crystal, part of that is compensation, and that's pretty much a hot topic. So how much, we don't say paid, because this is compensation for the suffering and what they're going through,
Invested, yes.
Right. So how much do surrogates get compensated for carrying a child, carrying a baby, going through this?
The compensation ranges quite a bit. And like Gloria mentioned, you see variances depending on where they are in the country. For instance, California is much higher. A lot of that has to do with the legal climate in California. There's really fantastic laws in place, which makes that one of the ideal places to go for a surrogate journey. But the range can generally be from 30,000, we see up to 80,000 for an experienced surrogate. Now, that said, it's rare to have surrogates around the 80,000 mark, but we have seen it. It definitely happens. Experienced surrogates overall across the country, we see that right around 50,000. That compensation, there's a set compensation that they get, but then there's also items such as maternity clothes, housekeeping, or bed rest. So there's many things that play a part into the surrogacy compensation. So we want to make sure that our intended parents are fully aware of what that fee schedule will look like. And when we are presenting candidates to our parents, we attach the fee schedule of the agency with there so they can really understand. And even that at times can be pretty confusing or overwhelming to review. So our role is also to help them understand that, to understand the full compensation package.
And does it vary depending on where the surrogate might be? We talked a lot about California surrogates, but I mean, our reach goes across the country. So we always try to tell people to keep an open mind. You may think you want a surrogate in California, but because of the laws, but there's some wonderful women in other states.
Exactly.
Like you're in Minnesota, can that bring the cost down?
Absolutely. In the
Yes.
in the Midwest, we definitely see the overall compensation for surrogates a bit lower. And that's usually because the general cost of living is lower. It definitely just can vary from state to state. And so I think just keeping in mind that we would be presenting the best possible candidate that's out there right now, given what the parents' wishes are, maybe regarding embryo transfer, regarding reduction or termination, regarding communication with the surrogate, their relationship. We look at all the candidates across the US and then present the best possible candidate only in surrogate friendly states. So we want to make sure, given your circumstances, we're presenting the best candidate. But we definitely do see quite the range depending on where they're located. The East Coast is higher, the West Coast is higher.
You also have to take into account travel costs. So the surrogate will have to come at least twice for a one-day workup. She'll have to fly for the embryo transfer, that sort of thing. So those are other factors that I would say we encourage people to understand, that it might balance out, you know, the lower cost of the surrogate.
Exactly. And talking to the intended parents and really finding out what's the most important part of your surrogate match. Is it the health of the surrogate and her deliveries? Then maybe we rule out location and we look for that best possible candidate. So I always try to ask my intended parents, you know, what's the most important, and are we flexible on these other things? If I see someone who really has the same philosophies around this pregnancy that you do, but she's not in the state that you were initially hoping for, are you flexible there? It's really individual. It kind of depends on each specific client.
Another great big question we get is, do the surrogates have insurance that covers the surrogacy pregnancy? Who wants to tackle that one?
Well, I think in general, lots of people who have her own insurance coverage, her insurance, unfortunately, most of the surrogate insurance, they won't cover their surrogacy journey. So that said, it's very rare to have surrogate. They have their insurance who can cover the surrogacy journey. In budget wise, I would say it's probably you should have a budget between 10,000 to 20,000 to cover these, to buy insurance. And also the agencies will help to review on her current insurance plan and then present intended parents the options on the insurance choices normally.
And there are companies that we work with that will do an insurance review too if there's some questions. You know, we never pretend to be insurance specialists, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That's good to have the insurance review right away, so then they can make recommendations on supplemental plans to cover the pregnancy. And what's funny is, I mean, 10 years ago, you'd be looking at surrogates and you'd have their insurance plan reviewed. Those exclusions weren't there. Those are more in recent years, I think, kind of as there became more and more surrogacy pregnancies, a lot of their health plans started adding language into those insurance plans excluding surrogacy journeys. So we do still see them occasionally. When we do it, it's pretty exciting. But we would really like to tell our parents to, like Gloria said, budget for insurance, because it's likely that there will have to be a supplemental insurance plan.
And I would imagine those surrogates that have insurance are going to be in high demand. We always say there's more intended parents looking for surrogates than there are surrogate candidates. So
absolutely.
And also I think intended parents should keep in mind that if you find a surrogate who has insurance, she may ask for higher compensation. Mm-hmm. So we always want to give a total cost estimate when we present the profile. So at least the intended parents have some, good estimate on the total cost, including the insurance, including the compensation agency fee, legal costs, travel costs. So the total budget will help the intended parents to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
So besides finding someone who meets not only ASRM guidelines, the fertility clinics criteria, there's a lot of things that go into our matching process. And one of the things we always say is we want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So what are some of the other things that we talk about with the intended parent before we do the matching? And before presenting their profile to our surrogate agencies?
I think there's a few things that go in. Initially, there's some absolutely crucial conversations that we need to have. For instance, single embryo transfer, double. It's actually more common. More clinics are just moving to single embryo transfer. It's not very common that I see a clinic that will even allow 2 embryos to be transferred to a surrogate, but making sure that we understand that from the get-go. And then understanding what termination and reduction looks like. What if you had transferred and there's some genetic condition you wanted to terminate the pregnancy? We need to make sure that we are matching parents and surrogates who have the same philosophy. We don't want to find that we are in the second trimester and there needs to be a termination of the pregnancy and then the surrogate doesn't wish to go along with that. That would absolutely be a heartbreaking situation. So we want to make sure that all parties are on the same page there before we even consider a match. And then what if the embryo splits? That happens. What would you want to reduce to a singleton? Sometimes it's best for the surrogate's health, and sometimes some parents are just hoping for a singleton. We just need to make sure that we understand everybody's philosophies and that they are on the same page. For the most part, we find a lot of surrogates who say, this isn't my child, and I leave these decisions to the intended parents to make. And I think that really helps us find really good matches for those surrogates who have those philosophies, that this is up to the intended parents, as long as it's not a health concern to me or a health concern to the baby, that I will respect the parents' wishes. That's what we really like to see.
Yeah, and also I think most of the surrogate, they will be okay to carry twins if single embryo transfer splits into twins. Maybe they don't want to have double embryo transfer, but if single embryo split and both babies are healthy, I think most of them, they will be okay with the twin pregnancy.
Yeah. Although I would say we usually caution people that not to, we can't guarantee we could find somebody who's open to a double embryo transfer. That's a high risk pregnancy with a higher likelihood of a NICU stay, and you put a lot of, not just the baby's health, but the surrogate's health in danger. So there could be a much higher additional costs by the end of it. So it's not, and we have a great blog too for the price of one, I think that covers that too.
Yeah, there's a lot of education there for the intended parents. I think some see, well, we want to have two, and rather than go through two surrogacy journeys, we'd like to try for twins. And I think luckily a lot of the parents who come to us already have a reproductive endocrinologist who've discussed this. But if they haven't, we like to walk them through about why single embryo transfer is the preferred method in the U.S.
What about the relationship status of the surrogate? Does that matter? Gloria?
Well, I think for most of the surrogate, they would prefer to remain contacted during the pregnancy, and also, maybe after the baby is born, at least once a year, a Christmas card, I think will make them very happy and comfortable. And when during the years I have working with a lot of intended parents, I think that's something they feel comfortable as well.
Oh, about the contact, yeah.
I think, the relationship, like as far as if she's married or single, that depends on, it's a lot of times the parents will have a preference one way or the other. And I have seen preferences where they want married, and some where they actually want her to be single, and their reasons are their own. We don't need to go into that, but we do see those preferences. And what we try to stress is we're looking at her background, at her home environment. And whether she's married or not, we just want to make sure that there is a stable home environment. Let's say that she is single and she lives with her sister. If she's over 18, we're going to do background checks on anyone over 18 in that household. So I don't think the relationship status is crucial, but some parents just feel more comfortable knowing that she has a partner there or a husband there who is able to support her, to take the kids when she has to go to appointments or when there's travel. But oftentimes we see surrogates who are single with a really great support system who are able to navigate this just fine.
Gloria, going back to you were just talking about contact with your surrogate, and you work with a lot of clients from China who maybe don't speak English. How do international parents, intended parents, navigate that whole contact thing? Or if your surrogate lives in, the middle of the country or somewhere remote that you may not, you may not be able to be there for every appointment, for instance.
Well, I would say, thanks for the technology, because people can do video call all the time. Mm-hmm. And also a lot of international clients, they use WeChat. And WeChat with international couple, especially Chinese couple, and also their surrogate, and they will be able to tap in their own language. And then there's a translate button you can click, and then it will automatically translate into English. So it's the same way around. So I think that's something that even the international intended parents, they couldn't be here, but video calls, messages, emails, that will help to build up the relationship and make the surrogate feel comfortable along the journey. One
of the things we talk with our intended parents about is about attitude with the surrogate. So they may come to us and they want somebody who's extremely healthy, who doesn't eat any junk food, who doesn't, who does yoga, who is or eating organic food. And I think our advice is always, these are women who have given birth before. They understand what it's like to be pregnant, and they've had healthy pregnancies. But how do you talk with your intended parents about, their anxieties about the process and finding somebody who's actually going to treat, this is their baby, obviously. So they're going to be very, so maybe they want her to eat organic food. How do you talk with them about things like that?
There's kind of two sides to that. So one, if they come and they say, we want somebody who is into holistic or natural or eats all organic and does yoga every day, we try to kind of show them, like, these are women who oftentimes have young children who are balancing their lives and they're taking care of their children. They might not be able to eat organic, although we do see some who are willing to do that. Sometimes
this kind of gets into the questions about legal things too. You can't force somebody to eat organic unless you want to pay for it, right?
Yes.
You can order home delivery.
I feel like a lot of surrogate, they will be open for that. Like, if you're gonna have the budget and deliver organic food to my house, and I would love to eat organic. Yeah, so that's something I think is really, it's not like a key factor or deal breaker for lots of intern parents. But however, we really want to talk to intern parents before they sign up or before they move forward. So we make sure we're on the same page, and also surrogate is comfortable with it. Like, maybe someone, they don't eat, red meat. They only, and if the Indian parents doesn't feel comfortable with that, so that won't be a good match. So it's always about communications, I think.
Right. Important. I think when you look at what's really important is, like, looking at already a very small candidate pool. We might see surrogates apply who do yoga, who use these holistic or who eat organic, but they might not be good surrogates. So ultimately we go back to what's really important is that she has had healthy, uncomplicated pregnancies, delivered full term, and that she has a stable home environment. We try to really focus on, this is what's very important for us. And we look at the best candidates here. All that other stuff, if she does yoga, if she eats organic, that's fantastic if we find her. But is that crucial? No, I don't think so. I really think it's important to find somebody who can carry your baby to term.
And what about going to the appointments and being involved in the pregnancy? How much contact, and we talked a little bit about that earlier, but if somebody could go to the appointments, do the surrogates want that? Do they encourage that? It's almost, the question is, whose pregnancy is this, and what should the intended parents expect when their surrogate does get pregnant?
I think absolutely the surrogates love that. I think the surrogates have their own lives. So do they want to text or have an hour-long chat every day? They might not have time for that. But when it comes to appointments, they've had babies themselves. They know how exciting these appointments are, and they are all for involvement for parents. It's not very common that I see surrogates who don't wish or who wish to have these appointments on their own. Usually they're very excited, and some even request that it's important that the parents come to these appointments. Now, Gloria touched on this too, like with the international clients, or let's say your surrogates across the country. With today's technology, they can be there. You can have a video chat, you can FaceTime or Skype and be right there to see the ultrasounds, to ask questions of the doctors. You can really have a presence there. And I absolutely think that the connection that the surrogates make with the intended parents is important, and that they really enjoy having that involvement.
Yeah, they can feel the love from the intended parents. Yeah.
Don't you think too that they don't look at that as their pregnancy? It's the pregnancy and the baby and that actually gets to a question which we see everywhere, which is, what if the surrogate wants to keep the baby?
These surrogates have families of their own and are usually done having children. They are not planning on having another child. This is usually, it's probably the biggest myth around surrogacy. So women who choose to be surrogates, they have proper evaluation by a mental health professional. They know that they're not genetically connected to this baby. I think we have a quote from someone here. It says, "When I was a surrogate, I did not feel like I was giving the baby up because she was never mine to begin with. I was just giving her back. We had a visceral connection from 9 months, nurturing her inside me, but I did not bond with her. In truth, I bonded with her parents in our mutual desire to bring her into the world so they could be a family." This is what we hear from surrogates over and over, that they are connected to you as a family and they're helping make your family complete by carrying this child, that they're taking care of your child because they have the physical capacity to do so until they can bring her into the world, her to you in the world. That is what we see, that they want to help you. This isn't about them bringing another child. But yes, we see that a lot. And it's definitely a concern that I can understand parents, especially you hear Google is terrible when you start exploring things. So it's like, just don't, and just trust that we've done our due diligence in thoroughly screening these surrogates and understanding their motivations and what is prompting them to be a gestational carrier.
We have a couple of other webinars about surrogacy law, and I don't want to get too far into that, but Gloria, one of the integral parts of the whole team that the intended parent will have will be the fertility attorney. What do you advise intended parents when you talk to them on the phone from the first time about having an attorney on board? And that's a big question, I know.
Yeah, I think for all type of families, before they start the surrogacy journey, it's better to have a consultation with the attorney. So mainly it's because they can get familiar with the whole process from legal point of view. When will be the time that the attorney will send all documents to a local court, how you get the court pre-birth order, and where the pre-birth order sent to, and how your names will be on the birth certificate, and especially for lots of international couples, how you can get the travel visa. So there's a lot of like logistic questions or legal process. I think the attorney will be the best person you can reach out and get fully prepared before you start this whole complicated journey.
Yeah, so we like the person to have an attorney on board, and we can make referrals to really great attorneys depending on where the intended parents live. But our thought is always that you have the attorney on board to help you make the decision about which states are good. So different states have different ways of assigning parentage to the intended parents. So these are all questions that we would encourage our clients to talk with an attorney about. For some states, it's a post-birth, and I'm not going to get into this because I'm not an attorney. Post-birth order, sometimes it's a pre-birth order. So we always defer to our legal teams. But one of the things, we've been talking about things like termination, like double embryo transfer. Would you say having the attorney on board from the beginning helps avoid any conflicts as in the contract? And are these things set out in the contract?
They're absolutely set out in the contract. So yeah, the attorney will be, before you guys do take any action with the gestational carrier, an attorney will be drafting that legal agreement. And that legal agreement outlines all of this. They are so thorough. The attorneys have seen and heard everything, and they make sure that everything is covered in those legal contracts. And you're exactly right. Like making sure that you have one that's familiar, that's licensed, maybe in the state that the surrogate's delivering, that you have some party there, because not even just the state, but sometimes we see variances between the counties within the state. So really understanding, making sure that you have somebody on your team who's really familiar with your specific scenario is so important.
And to clarify, go ahead, Gloria.
Yeah, especially for single parents or single parents, international single parents, or if you're using your own genetic embryos or not genetic related embryos. So that's all those key factors if the surrogate law is friendly based on your situation or not. So those are the questions you really want to get clarified with the attorney before you even start. But with donor concierge, of course, we only present you the surrogate from surrogate-friendly states that based on your status, like if you're single or using own or not using your own genetics, and we only present surrogate, which is surrogate-friendly states for your situation.
Exactly.
And to clarify too, that the surrogate herself will have her own legal representation who's separate. So that's when the two legal teams get together and they discuss the contract.
Exactly.
I actually know of one mental health therapist too, who also goes through the contract with the intended parents and the surrogate, so that they can all understand, as we were talking about termination, what does that mean to some people? Would you terminate for Down syndrome? For some people they would, some people they wouldn't. So it's really, both the attorneys, the mental health therapists, they're all there to clarify the what ifs. Would you say that's?
And also we will help to clarify, what's the termination or reduction preference for the surrogate. For example, Down syndrome, if there's any abnormalities, will the surrogate agree to terminate? So this is some question that we already clarified before we even present a surrogate to the intended parents.
And these are really hard questions, and sometimes our intended parents may not know the answers until they start thinking it. You have to think it through ahead of time. How do you present the intended parents to the surrogate? What happens if someone's one of our clients? What happens after the consultation? What happens? Gloria?
We will actually help intended parents to draft a Dear Surrogate letter. So Dear Surrogate letter, we have outlines and help intended parents how you can draft this, including, you can talk about yourself and why you need a surrogate, how you're going to raise your baby, your photos. And we also have some samples of letter we want to share with intended parents as well. So this letter is really important because this will help you to, when we present the letter to the surrogate, and if the surrogate can feel connected with intended parents or not. And this is the first step. Before we even start contacting the agencies or reaching out to review the surrogate profiles, we want to have this Dear Surrogate letter done, and we will help intended parents to get it prepared.
And we always say the surrogate chooses you as much as you choose her. This is a mutual matching. There needs to be some sort of connection, an emotional connection, right? So
yes,
what happens if a surrogate, I'm just going to go through the steps, the process. So we send out a profile to our intended parent. They say, yes, she looks great. What happens after that? Crystal? Or whoever.
Go ahead, Krista.
You said you presented to the surrogate, and I'm glad you stressed that, Michelle, that it is a two-way street. Like this is a long commitment, and we want to make sure both parties are comfortable. Unlike egg donation, it's not the parent selecting the donor and the donor doesn't know. This is both parties feel really comfortable with one another. So we present the profile to the intended parents when we feel that there's a good match. If they agree, then at that point we go back to the agency and say, my clients are really interested in this. And the agency has a hold on her for us for that review. But then we come back to the agency and say, my intended parents are interested. Like Gloria referenced, they have a Dear Surrogate letter, and we share that with the agency at that time to present to the surrogate. If she also feels the connection, at that point, we ask the agency to share all of her medical records and OB records with the intended parent's reproductive endocrinologist. We want to make sure that they have a chance to review, that everything looks great.
These are like 60 to 100 page documents, right? That
huge.
Yeah, we don't have access to those.
Yeah, sometimes they have like over 500 pages of documents. Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to get those over to the doctor. And sometimes it's interesting enough is depending on the hospital she delivered or the length of time, we might not be able to obtain all of those medical records. So we want to make sure as your case manager with Donor Concierge, we check in with the clinic, and sometimes we're able to get an OB clearance letter, maybe if we're missing partial records, but we try to get the clearest picture of her labor, delivery, pregnancy, over to your doctor to review. If we have approval, kind of the pre-approval I mentioned before, she hasn't started medical screening, but if we have that pre-approval based on her records, at that time, we like to facilitate a match call. This is usually facilitated by the agency. We have a Donor Concierge representative there on the call also. to help introduce you both, the intended parent and the gestational carrier, and get to know one another a little bit more. Oftentimes people make a connection right away. Sometimes you need to learn a little bit more about each other. Each match call is so different, but that really gives us a good starting point. Like, okay, do we feel like this is a good match? Do we want to proceed with this surrogate? So it's not we present a profile to the intended parents and they decide to match right there. It's a big decision, so we want to make sure that they're armed with all of the information they need to make that decision.
And also, lots of times before we arrange the match video call between the intended parents and their surrogate, we already have the agency agreement sent to the intended parents, so they can review on the documents and also have an interview with the agency before they even meet with their surrogate. So they just feel comfortable with the terms, conditions, and they fully aware of, if there's anything happen, what the agency's policy is. So they have all the information they need before they meet with the surrogate. And then when they meet with the surrogate, if they, fall in love each other, it is an official match, because we want to make sure intended parents is not only feel comfortable working with the surrogate, and they also feel comfortable with the agency.
Exactly.
And they would also they may even meet the surrogate's partner. They may meet her children. You're matching with a family almost, aren't you? Because surrogates generally have children at home.
Yep.
I don't want to, we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but one of the other questions that I think people really fear, especially intended parents, is, will I bond with the baby? And I don't know if either of you would like to take a stab at that one.
I think we both can. It's a resounding yes. Many parents via surrogacy are nervous that they won't have a bond with their baby because they didn't carry or didn't feel it moving or make this connection in utero. But the more involved you can be in the process, the more it'll help all of you bond with your baby. Going to the clinic appointments, calling your surrogate. Remember, the surrogate's given birth to her own children, so she understands kind of what to expect throughout the pregnancy, and she can help kind of keep you informed. I felt the baby move today. We even have parents sometimes who will ask the surrogates to put like headphones on her belly and play like some of their favorite songs, and or some will even like sing lullabies. So there's so many ways to kind of feel connected to that baby, even though you aren't right there, even though you aren't carrying. So our parents always feel, they see the baby and they're like, this is my child. Nothing chokes me up more than seeing like photos of intended parents and the surrogate and the baby. It's amazing. I love seeing them. I love seeing the stories. I love seeing like just that. And oftentimes surrogates talk about that. They're like, seeing my intended parents' face when they held their baby for the first time was just amazing. So there's that connection. There absolutely is. Sure.
Gloria, what does somebody do? What's the process with us? So if somebody wants to start a surrogacy journey with us, our title of this is Where Do I Start? So where do we start? Where would someone start if they want to start a surrogacy journey and they need our help?
We will have a free consultation. And then once we have the free consultation, we learn intended parents what they're looking for, and we know their journey has been up to this point. And then we will, talk the details on their preference, and we will also have a very detailed conversation about their clinic requirements and also what is most important during this journey. So once they get prepared, they can fill out our online intake form, and then we will have a pre-search call and we'll start the search.
I know one question that we get asked a lot is that, and that's about timing. So how would you approach that question? Like, when do I start a journey? I don't have embryos yet. I do have embryos. What's the timing? What does the timing look like for a surrogacy journey when they're working with Donor Concierge?
We typically like them to have their embryos ready. The reason for that is most surrogates are ready to go in there. It makes you a more, attractive candidate, but the embryo creation process is uncertain, and it can take a long time. So having those embryos ready to go when we start our surrogate search is really ideal. That keeps the process moving. Now, specifically with Donor Concierge, the search is usually 4 to 6 weeks, and we're usually presenting you candidates within the first 2 weeks, depending on what candidates are out there and what your criteria is. Then we help facilitate all the way until surrogate match. But even then, after that, we're part of your team, and we're always here for any questions or concerns you have throughout the entire process.
And what about the question of, what if you don't find me somebody? Because we do get asked that a lot.
We sometimes get asked that. Usually at the front end, though, it's usually like before we start the search, because we see who's out there. So if we're really struggling, we'll know by your criteria if we need to have some more conversations about that, and being really realistic. I mean, if somebody comes back and has really specific criteria, we might say this is going to take us longer than what we're estimating to find. We don't see these candidates very often, so we can't guarantee you a timeline. But I think if you really understand, if our intended parents really understand what's important in finding a surrogate, then we are able to find what candidates are out there and available very quickly. Lori, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I kind of took that.
I think that's excellent answer.
Yeah, and again, it's not about showing you everybody who's out there. It's, we have a process of showing one or maybe two candidates at a time, so you can see and it's not a comparison. It's about who's the healthiest candidate to carry your baby in the most legally straightforward way. Is that a good way to summarize?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else to add about specific questions you may? And I know there's hundreds of questions, and we want people to ask those questions too. So
I think there are more and more we can talk about, but give us a call.
Yeah.
And we will be very happy to talk to the intended parents over the phone and answer any questions you have and help you with the journey.
Absolutely. The questions can really be so specific to each client. So having that one-on-one time where we really understand where you're coming from, we kind of know which direction to take then. So.
Yeah, and finally, I think I would say, this is a journey that's a team effort. This isn't just your surrogate. This isn't just your fertility doctor. This is, case managers and mental health therapists and attorneys and genetics. Maybe, I don't know if the genetic counselors get involved more with the embryo creation, but, this is a team effort, and everybody in this field has the same goal, which is to help you have a baby.
Exactly. And to go back to like the first question about what makes a good agency, is that's overwhelming, I think, for parents to hear how many people are involved. A good agency helps manage all of that.
Right. And again, that's why we work with smaller boutique agencies, because they may have available candidates and they don't have the clients. They're good at finding surrogate candidates, but not so much clients. So we are we're the intended parents representative. Some of the bigger agencies are wonderful, but there may be a waiting list. So you may be waiting and, several months to maybe a year to find a surrogate. So we have access to so many more candidates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we still work a lot with those larger agencies. Oftentimes they come to us with clients who are struggling to find an egg donor as they're starting the surrogacy search. So that, I think, using Donor Concierge, you're able to move up your timeline because you're not going from agency to agency, and oftentimes there is a wait. So we're able to find those best candidates who are currently available.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Is there anything else we missed?
Oh, there's so much.
I know.
There's so much more.
Okay. Well, we'll be posting this, and we look forward to talking to everybody who's been watching, and anybody who watches this in the future too.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle.
Bye.
Okay, bye.